Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi, my name is Cydney. I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to thank Nancy for asking me to come and speak here tonight. I'd like to wish the birthday people happy birthday, and I'd like to welcome all the newcomers. And now I can... And Jane asked me just a few minutes ago, was I nervous? And I wasn't, but now I am. You know, and I guess for me, the nervousness comes from having to be honest. You know, at a podium of Alcoholics Anonymous is a place where I absolutely cannot be dishonest. And I'll tell you, I lived a lot of years not knowing what honesty was, you know, really thinking that I was living an honest life, and I wasn't. I was living the best life that I know how to live. But it was pretty much a life that was very self-centered and based on a lot of dishonesty. It was the best that I could do. It was absolutely the best that I could do. And it's taken me a lot of years of being sober in this program to be able to tell you that and to pretty much believe it without having to beat myself up over it. I got sober September 25th, 1986, and I got sober in a treatment center in Burbank, and I have, by the grace of God, been sober since the day I walked into that treatment center. I did not come to Alcoholics Anonymous. I came to a hospital-based program. That was just what happened to me. They're the ones who introduced me to Alcoholics Anonymous. That's where I learned that if I wanted to stay sober and learn how to live sober, that I'd better come to Alcoholics Anonymous, because they had the solution to my problems of living. I had no idea what in God's name they were talking about. I only knew that when I walked through the doors of that treatment center, my life didn't work anymore. I had no idea. I had no idea how I'd gotten there. You know, I only knew that I was at a place in my life where I was truly pitiful and suffering from incomprehensible demoralization. Those are probably the only words in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that I understood when I got here. I knew what pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization was. I knew that I was feeling like a piece of, excuse the expression, shit. I mean, I was empty on the inside, and I had a life that looked like it should be working on the outside. And it wasn't. It was not working. I was gone. I was like an empty shell. And I really didn't know why. I did not know why. I did not believe that I was an alcoholic. I knew I was a drug addict, and I will share about parts of that in my story, because that is my story. That's what brought me to Alcoholics Anonymous. It took me 3.5 years in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous to become an alcoholic. I came here a drug addict. No question in my mind about that. No question in my mind about that. It took me 3.5 years in this program before I truly started to suffer from the obsession to drink. I never was obsessed to drink, because I never tried to stop. I just always did it. Always drank whenever I wanted, what I wanted, when I wanted it. And with the drinking, I used drugs. My story starts when I was about 16 years old, and it starts with alcohol, but it took me a long time to get in this program to realize where my story started. It didn't start there in my head when I got here. But the first time I ever remember getting drunk is when I was 16. I went to this dance at the Beverly Hilton Hotel on the corner, and I was born and raised in Los Angeles, so it's that hotel that's on the corner of Santa Monica and Wilshire. And in those days, it was the only big hotel in the city of Los Angeles, new hotel, and that's where they had all the charity functions. And I was invited to this dance by the son of the woman who was the chairman of the fundraiser for this ball. And I got all dressed up in a beautiful dress and went to this dance, this dinner dance thing. And, you know, they were passing around free drinks and all kinds of hors d'oeuvres, and I just partook of the drinks. I think what I drank were something called gin gimlets. They were like in these wonderful glasses, you know, that everything has come back now. Those, you know, like champagne glasses, and had these little green things in them, and it was water, and it tasted delicious. And I drank them and drank them and drank them and drank them. I mean, every time they came around, those things, I just grabbed one and down it went. I didn't know about sipping. I just went, and it was down. And the next thing I remember was throwing up in the bathroom, and I don't really remember getting through the dinner. I do remember having him drive me home, and I remember a lot of the older people at the dance, because they were all older. I was probably the youngest one there, you know, asking me if I was okay. You know, I couldn't understand why they were asking me if I was okay. I figured I looked good. I had this gorgeous white dress on, and, you know, God knows what I look like. I was thinking about this when they were doing the reading this evening. That was my first experience drinking, and I had never, from the age of 16, ever drank gin again. Never drank it again, because I was sure that the problem was gin. The next time I drank, for some reason, when I was in high school, I went out with a lot of guys that were, you know, doing a lot of big stuff. Their fathers were like heads of things. So this guy's father was the head of the 20th Century Fox Studios, and they were having they had this dinner. It was an opening for a movie, and they had like, I don't know what the heck it was, but it was a fraternity thing. It was a private screening in the studio, and Gary's laughing in his were you there, Gary? You might have been there. Was it you I was with? You never know. Maybe that's why you seemed so familiar when I first met you. You know, and this guy, they were serving dinner and a private screening and vodka and orange juice. So, you know, I knew I couldn't drink this stuff that had the green things in them, so I drank the orange juice that had the vodka in it, and I drank and drank and drank and drank. And the next thing I remember is going up to this place on the Sunset Strip. It was called Cyrano's, which is where everybody hung out. That was like the big place, and throwing up in the parking lot. This guy had a, I know he had a sports car because it was low to the ground. I just had to lean out. And then I went home, and I don't remember getting home, but I remember my mother, you know, saying something to me about, gee, you know, you're sick again from, you know, drinking too much. And I never, ever drank vodka again, ever. And that's the beginning. That's how it started for me. I was after those two episodes in my early experience drinking, I was very careful about the way I drank. It became very clearly apparent to me that I did not know how to drink, and that I drank too much, too fast, that liquor didn't agree with me, that I better be very careful about the way I drank. And so I really was. And I spent a lot of years, I went, you know, did a lot of partying in college, a lot of this fraternity thing and the sorority stuff and the, you know, all the stuff, you know, the drinking out of the back of the cars at the football games, and, you know, the whole deal. And I was very careful the way I drank. I drank very controlled. I made sure that I did not get drunk. I just knew that if I did, I would be thrown up somewhere, and I wouldn't, you know, God knows what would happen. And I did that for a long, long time. I went to college. I graduated college. I got a degree. I got married when I was very young to a fellow who was, you know, very accomplished, and he was a professional, and we grew up together and had children, and I had this, you know, we both made a lot of money, and we had a house with the money, you know, with all the stuff, and 3 children and a maid and the whole thing. So you know, looked great. And I became more accomplished in my profession, and I traveled, and I taught, and I wrote, and I did all this stuff. And the more I did that, the more frightened I became. And it's what happened with me. And during the course of all this, you know, I'm not drinking on a daily basis, but I'll tell you what I was like, and that is when I had my second baby, and I had my children young, and I had them one right after the other, because I am an alcoholic. I didn't know that, you know, so if I do something once, I'm going to do it again, and then, you know, 3 times is about enough for me. And that's what I did with the children. And I had a woman who used to come and help me take care of the babies. She came for my first baby, and she came for my second baby. And when she came for the second baby, I remember her sitting me down one evening and telling me that, to mixing me a drink and telling me I needed to have a drink to unwind. So, you know, and I told her, well, I can't drink, I'm nursing. And she'd say, well, I think you need to do something to unwind, you know, whatever. So that's what I was like. I was very wired. I was very driven. I was very up one minute, down the next, not particularly pleasant to be around, but very accomplished. And that's the way I lived my life. And I was not particularly happy in it. I did all the right stuff. I looked really good. The kids looked good. The house looked good. The husband looked good. The whole thing looked great. And my story happens to be in the big book. There's a section in there that talks about women alcoholics and that we don't have to drink long periods of time, but we go downhill real quick. And that's pretty much what happened to me. As I started drinking scotch and soda, my father-in-law, Mike, neat guy, but my in-laws were daily drinkers. They'd drink in the evening. They'd start around 5:30, 6 o'clock. I don't think either one of them ever blacked out. They were, you know, that's what they did. And so I would go over there to have dinner when I was young, and I was always looking for a way to drink, but without getting sick. And Mike taught me how to do that. He said if I had scotch and soda in a tall glass with a little bit of scotch and a lot of soda, I could drink it slow enough. He didn't tell me this. He didn't give me these instructions. This is what I figured out. You know, he gave me this drink, and I figured out that if I drank that slow enough, I could get high, get that buzz on, fill that hole, and not throw up, and not get sloppy drunk. And that's what I did. I did that for a lot of years. I started with that, and I never drank in the morning, never drank during the day. But boy, as my life evolved and I got into my middle 30s, I lived my life for that drink in the evening time when I get home. I had a housekeeper. I would get home from work, and the first thing I would do is hit that bar, and it was a gorgeous bar, beautiful bar, and I would start with that drink, and I'd pour that drink at 4:30, and I'd drink it until I went to sleep at night, until I would pass out. And I couldn't have told you this for the first 3 years of sobriety, because I didn't identify at that level. I identified with drugs. What happened during that period of time is that there was a lot of drug use. I was living in the West Valley. The drugs were rampant. Lots of marijuana, people smoking a lot of pot. I tried pot, didn't like it. It gave me some kind of a sense of whatever. It just didn't work for me. I didn't like it. It wasn't my thing. So I let it go. I didn't do a lot. I did it very minimal. As a matter of fact, I threw away a bunch of pot when I got sober. It was in my freezer somewhere underneath some Haagen-Dazs thing that was there for 27 years. I opened up this Haagen-Dazs, and inside of it is this bag of pot. Oh, I don't want this. Now, originally, my first thought was maybe I should sell this. Oh, it's been in there so long, maybe, it's probably no good. But I didn't find any cocaine left over in my house when I got sober. I did that too, and I love that. And I did lots of pills. I learned early on that if mixing pills with booze let me drink more, that doing cocaine let me drink more. And so when I tell my story, I am truly an alcoholic. I loved what alcohol did for me from the time I was 16. I just didn't know how to do it, and do it in a fashion that was controlled. And when I finally did learn how to do that, how to drink those scotch and sodas slow, and how to chemically mix whatever it was I was putting in my body so that I could drink and get that sustained high, that was what made my life work. And it made my life work for about 7 years. And let me tell you what happened to me in that 7 years. It's not a pretty picture. I was raised in home which neither of my parents were alcoholics. As a matter of fact, in my immediate family, I have one sister, and my mom has 5 brothers and sisters, and none of whom are alcoholics. My father has about 4 or 5 brothers and sisters, none of whom I've ever met. Interesting family. I've never met any of them. However, I have met my cousin, one cousin on his side. She is a drunk. I love her dearly. And the only stories I ever heard about my grandmother on my dad's side was that you're always like your grandmother. She always had a beer in her hand, and they were always, she and your dad, your father were always running from the bill collectors. So, I have a feeling that there may have been some alcoholism on my father's side. But, there wasn't any in my immediate family. My mother and father didn't drink. I mean, they drank on, they'd have beers when my father played poker. The guys would get together, they'd have beers when he played poker. And I would, when I was a little tiny kid, I remember reaching up to try and get the beer. I love beer. Everybody knew that Cydney liked beer. They thought it was so cute. Little Cydney loved beer. And, but they didn't drink. They didn't drink, and so I wasn't raised with it, and I didn't seek it out when I was a kid. In my youth, but and it was also instilled in me when I was growing up the values of family. That family is very important. You go to. My mother said you have to go to college and you have to have a profession, but you also have to get married and you also have to have kids and you also have to live in the house and have all the stuff and all this. So this is what I was taught to believe was what would make me whole, and this is what I did. So I had those 3 children, and I had the profession, and I had the house, and I had the stuff, and I had the husband. I had all of it, and I gave it all away behind alcohol and booze. I just threw everything in my life that meant anything to me away behind alcohol and booze, and it's taken me a long time to realize that. Anything that mattered to me. I was living in Santa Barbara. I was living down first we were living down in Woodland Hills, and that's where I raised these little kids. And then we moved from Woodland Hills to Santa Barbara because my husband at the time opened another law practice up there, and that's where he wanted to go, and it was easier for us. That's where he wanted to go, so I agreed that's what I wanted to do, and I went. But my profession was down here. This was at a point in my life where I was starting to use drugs along with drinking, okay? And I was hanging out with a couple of women who I'd met out in Calabasas who did lots of grass and lots of cocaine and lots of pills, and they could get anything that they wanted whenever they wanted it, and they were feeding, so I had all of this stuff going on. I was also working at the time in the movie industry. I had tons of stuff that I could do, and I was partying as much on the side as I could, and still be the housewife in Woodland Hills. And my behavior was not what you might call the most admirable behavior for a 35-year-old mother of 3, wife of an attorney. And so when it came time to move to Santa Barbara, I thought, well, this is a great thing. I'll go. I'll just go and I'll get away from all this, and it'll make my life better, okay? Because the problem is all the drugs and stuff that I have down here, I'll get out of it, I'll go to this nice straight community up in Santa Barbara, and I'll be fine. There's the geographic, okay? So I go up to Santa Barbara, right? I thought I was going to die of boredom up there. It's a fabulous town. Nothing happens there. At least that was my perception. I couldn't stand it up there. Nobody did. Nobody knew who I was. They all knew who my husband was, but they had no idea who I was. There was no way that I could get into any of the stuff that I wanted to get into. I was stuck in this house, for the first time in my life with 3 children, trying to figure out, what to do with myself, because I didn't have a job, and I didn't, I was writing a book or something at the time, and I was traveling, and that's about it. Believe me, I was such an obsessive. That's not enough for me. I have to have something going on every second of the time, and I have to have constant feedback about how great I am. It has to come in from everywhere, and I wasn't getting that in Santa Barbara. So, essentially, what happened is I found a way to get some drugs when I was up there. I also I went into therapy. And the therapist told me that he thought that I was an abused child and that it was wreaking havoc in my life. Never mind, I never told him that I was drinking. Put me into group therapy where there was a lot of other alcoholics, and I was in heaven. All drinking alcoholics and drug addicts. So I met my man. I met my peer group there. And I went off to do my to behave in a way that was similar to the way I was behaving down in Los Angeles, not very admirable. And I also, at that point in time, realized that the reason that my life was not working was because I got married way too young. I never had a chance to date. I met my husband when I was 17 years old, married him when I was 19. I had no dating time. I needed to date. Okay? So what I did was I decided that I needed a job down in Los Angeles and I would leave. And so what I did is that I sent my resume out, and I was interviewed at several places, and I got a job, a fairly big job down here in Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley. And I left. I left the children with their father, and I packed up and I moved down to a condominium in Woodland Hill, in Tarzana. And my life proceeded to go downhill from there. My drinking and using, I wanted to be by myself. I could do what I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it, and how I wanted to do it. And that's exactly what I did for the next 3 years. For the next 3 years, I drank and used and did everything I could do. Every sense of morality went right out the window for me. And I wound up losing the job that I had been hired into. I went out with some men who were really, where did I hear that? Somebody said something about going, did you? Yes, of bar men. Men you met in bars? Mine, I didn't meet in bars. I hate to even tell you where I met them. No, you can meet some characters in fairly high-end places, but they were not great, and I did that. I managed my life to the point where I still saw my children, although they really didn't want to spend a whole lot of time with me. My family really didn't care to spend a whole lot of time around me either. My mother and father had no idea what was going on with me. They just could not fathom why I would leave this husband and children and why I would be doing what I was doing. Nobody really wanted to be around me very much at all. I wasn't very much fun. I was so self-obsessed. I didn't answer phone calls. I'd take on responsibilities for organizations, etc. I wouldn't answer my phone. I was really, when I think back on it, I was in big trouble. And ultimately, what happened is that I got to the point where I almost lost my license to practice, and it was behind that I decided that maybe I ought to go and get some help with my drug problem. And so I don't know about Alcoholics Anonymous, but I had a friend who I had worked with and who had started a drug rehab program out in Burbank. And so I picked up the phone and I called him and I told him that I wanted to come into his program. I had, just prior to that, gotten myself another job down in San Diego at a large institution. And that was going to be my other geographic. I was going to get out of Los Angeles, go down there, get away from all my problems, and everything was going to be okay. And I'll never forget driving down to San Diego to La Jolla and interviewing at this institution down there, and knowing in my heart when I made that drive down there and got hired that this was the wrong thing to do. I was in big trouble. I was in really big trouble. So when I drove back up here, by the grace of God, that's when somebody picked up the phone and called me and told me they wanted me to come in, they wanted to talk to me, and they said to me, no, you're in trouble, you need some help, and you better get it. And so I called up Jim and I told him I needed to come in and I wanted an outpatient program because I wasn't sick enough to require an inpatient program, but I just needed an outpatient program. And so Jim said, well, come on in. And I told him I would. And I also told him that nobody could know about this, not my family. I didn't want anybody to know about this because this was, had to be done in a way in which nobody ever found out, because after all, I had to get out of there within 30 days so I could be at this job down in San Diego. And he said, no problem. No problem. You don't have to tell anybody. Just come on in. And I did. I went in, and when I got there, he told me that I had to be in the hospital, that he would not put me in an outpatient program, that the only program that was going to work for me was this inpatient program. And I tried to talk him out of it, and he wouldn't let me. He said, look, you have a drug problem, you need to be in the hospital. So I went home that night, and I called up one friend that I had and told her where I was. I'd just been in Europe with her. I'd been to London with her the year before. So when I told her I had a problem with drugs, she said, oh, really? She wasn't, oh, my God. And I asked her if she would feed my cats when I went. I think I had two cats then. Would she feed them and not tell anybody? And she said, sure, no problem. And I went into this program, and I didn't tell anybody. And I went in, and I'll tell you, I got there, I'll never forget going through the front door of that place thinking that, maybe just there, I just had a sense of relief. I just walked in there and I thought, oh, God, thank you. Maybe I won't have to fight so much anymore. That's how I felt. I was just wiped out, tired, exhausted. And they gave me a roommate, and I climbed into bed that night, and the next morning, they told me that I had to stay in bed or do some cockamamie thing because I was in detox for 3 days. And I told them, I said, I do not have a problem with drugs. I never drank that much. I do not need to be in detox. Give me back my clothes. I want to go to class. They had this class thing that starts at 7 o'clock in the morning with some calisthenic thing, and it goes to 10 o'clock at night, and they don't let you do anything, but they just keep you in this motion for 28 days. So they told me, fine, here's your clothes back. Go to class, because I'm a student by profession. I can pass anything. I can go to class, I can take the test, I can pass, I'll get an A. This is my thought, I'll get an A. 28 days here, I'll get an A, get my degree, my diploma, I'm out of here. I'll be down to San Diego to do my deal. Well, so they gave me back my clothes and I went to class. And the first time I was in class, we had to sit in a room and everybody had to identify. And I'll tell you, everybody went around the room to identify, and I identified for the first time. My name is Cydney, I am a sterile opiate addict. Everybody laughed. And then they asked me to explain what that is. So I had to explain what that was, because I was different, that's what I was. I was a drunkie, and let me tell you, I got really sick in the next few days when I was in there, really sick. And I went to class sweating, and I went to class shivering, and I went to class with stomach aches, but I didn't go back to my room, and I didn't put on my gown. I just showed up. And they sent me to some program over at Glendale one night because they told me that I needed extra help, and there was a professional group over there that would help me, and I went over there. And I remember walking into that room and seeing a bunch of professionals who also had the same kind of problems that I had, and I signed up for that program. And I did what they told me to do in that treatment center. And at the end of the 28 days, I left there. And there's a fellow who's a counselor there. I think he's working here as a therapist in the West Side now. His name is Mark. And as I walked out the doors of that treatment center, Mark said to me, Cydney, all we did was get you sober. If you want to stay sober, you've got to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's what I just knew at that time that I did not want to feel that pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization ever again. So I did, and also I didn't think I had any choice. I thought once you do this, you have to do what they tell you to do, when they tell you to do it, and how they tell you to do it. I did not believe that I had any choice. Thank God for that. Thank God for that, because I did what they told me to do. I went to the aftercare. I didn't want to lose my license to practice. I knew I was going to have to do that. I went to the aftercare. I had my card signed. I went to the support groups that I had to go to for this professional group. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. Mark said to me, you've got 30 days of sobriety. Go and identify as a newcomer anyway, because that people will find out who you are. And you can tell them afterwards you have more than 30 days. But when they ask for people who are new, raise your hand. And I did. And I urge anybody who is new to a meeting, who has 30 days or more and wants to meet people, raise your hand when they ask for newcomers, because that's how we meet people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's what worked for me. I got home and I went back to my condominium. I was living by myself. They let me do that. I don't know why they didn't put me in a recovery home. I don't know, but they let me go back. maybe because they had me signed up for all these aftercares, I was going to be going back to this place, 5 days a week. They were going to be able to know if I showed up or not. I don't know, but they didn't. I went back home, and I needed to go to meetings. I needed to find Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and I didn't know anybody in Alcoholics Anonymous except for the people who were out, the few people that I met out at the Barefoot group in Burbank. And so I picked up the telephone. I had one friend who I knew was in the program, who was over at Felicity House, and I called her. And I told her that I had just gotten out of this treatment center and that I wanted to go to meetings with her. And she said to me, "Did you relapse?" And I said to her, "No, I haven't relapsed yet. I've only been out for an hour and a half. I haven't relapsed." I was like paranoid. "Why are you asking me this?" And she said, "Because you have AA, your keys are all in AA chips. I thought you'd been in the program for months and years." I said, "What?" And she said to me, "Your keys are on AA chips." Because she'd been in my apartment. She's a friend of mine. She's been, she's a professional and a friend of mine who'd been in and out of my condominium for a long time. I was upstairs on the telephone, and I was talking to her, having this conversation, and I said, "They're not on AA chips. They're on my professional organization chips." And I hung up the phone. I went downstairs, and I have a plaque that sits in my kitchen, and my son made it for me. And on that plaque were all of my keys that I had been using for the last 3 years since I left Santa Barbara. They were all on AA chips. And I'll tell you where I found them. When I took the job, when I left Santa Barbara and I took the job down in Burbank, they gave me a big office and a desk. And I came down there, and the first day I was in that office, I opened that desk, and in the top drawer of that desk were all of these chips. The top drawer was full of these colored chips, yellow and green. It makes me like, I haven't told this story in a long time, and I just get the chills. All these chips were there, and I grabbed a handful of these chips, and I took them home. And I put my keys on them. I put my garage door key on one set, and I put my mailbox key on a red chip, which was 90 days, and I put the pool and the jacuzzi key on the green ones, and I had an extra blue one hanging there. I remember standing there looking at those chips and starting to cry and thinking, maybe there are no coincidences. And that's when the program started for me with those chips. I took so many chips when it was time for me to take chips the first year of sobriety. I had a box of chips at home. That was like this big. I picked up chips everywhere. And I threw them in the box, and I took them home. And I held on to those chips until I was about 4 years. And at 4 years of sobriety, because I wasn't going to give those away to anybody, I took them to a meeting where I had a chip commitment and gave every single one of them away. It's that kind of thing that worked for me early on, those kinds of things. Barbara took me to the Marina Center. That's where I met her. I was living in Tarzana. I get up early in the morning. I get in my car. Those are my bad times, early in the morning. I get in my car, I drive across the hill, and I come to the Marina Center for the 6:45 meeting, and I'd sit next to Barbara, and then we would go out to coffee. We'd go to this place called the Crest House after coffee, and I'd sit around with all these people. I don't even remember who they were. And we would talk and whatever, and then I'd get in the car, and I'd drive back to the Valley, and then I'd go to a noon meeting in the Valley, and then I would go to a night meeting at, God knows where. I'd go back to the hospital or back to the support group or whatever. And I did that, and I got myself a sponsor right off the bat, a woman who sponsored me that I met in the treatment center, and she looked great. She was really a neat-looking lady, and she helped me a lot. She made me got me into the steps. And when I was 9 months sober, I had to move. All of a sudden, my condominium was being sold. I was leasing it at the time, and so it was being sold, and I had to move. And I'm saying, wait a minute, I can't move. They said not to make any changes in the first year of sobriety. I can't move. And Sally said, well, guess what? I guess you're going to have to move. And so she said she would help me find a place to live, and she did. She and I went looking for places. We went everywhere on the west side, and I finally found a place with Sally over on Palms Boulevard, and I moved. And at the same time that it was time for me to move, around that time my son showed up. My oldest boy wanted to become a paramedic, and he needed to do some training down here in Los Angeles. And so he showed up and said, Mom, can I live with you? I need to take this training in Los Angeles. And so I said yes. And so he came back into my life, and he and I were living together, and we moved over to Palms.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
You know, I moved into that building, and guess what? In that building, there were 3 people on the program. The building only had 6 units. 3 of them were on the program. 2 people were married and lived upstairs, and another woman who was up on the top, also up on the top floor. So, you know, I pull into the driveway one day, and here's this Porsche that says Promises or some cockamamie thing on it. And, you know, and so I met people, and I got started, you know, in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank God for the Marina Center, because when I moved on this side of the hill, I knew about the Marina Center. I knew about a step study that was going on in Santa Monica Hospital. I met another woman who had years and years of sobriety, who is now sponsoring me. It would take over for Sally when I came over on this side of the hill. Things just started to happen for me. You know, I had a lot of difficulties in my first 5 years of sobriety. Life for me in my first 5 years of sobriety was not what you might call easy. My mother died when I was 14 months sober. She died of cancer. My mother and I had not what you might call a great relationship when I first got sober. I would go to visit her, and they would hide her Percodan when I came in the house because they were afraid I was going to steal it, because I was being, you know, rigorously honest, and I told them that I took some when I was, you know, before I got sober. Well, that just scared the holy daylights out of them. So, you know, they went and hid everything, and they were terrified when I'd come to visit. But, you know, when my mother died, I was with her at her bedside, and I was able to come in the early evening by myself and help take care of her when she was in pain and she needed to be taken care of, and I was able to show up and, you know, help my sister, you know, do the things that needed to be done for my mom, and to be there for my father. And 3 years later to the day, my father died of cancer, just before I turned 5, and that was very, very painful for me. It was not an easy thing. I love my father dearly. You know, I think we always have, some of us have, I don't know, for me, he was my soulmate. And so when he died, it was like losing a part of me. But, you know, it was the people in the program here who helped me through that. You know, I remember trying to hold it together for my dad, and sitting down one morning at the Marina Center, I just completely lost it. And BJ was on one side of me, and Bruce was on the other side, and they put their arms around me, and they told me it was going to be okay. And then when it came time for my dad's funeral, his one relative, Sally, came to town, and Sally was drunk. You know, and the woman, Iris, the woman who lived upstairs from me, came downstairs, because, you know, at the time, just before that, about a month or 2 before that, I couldn't get to the meetings I needed to go to because I was spending some time with my dad and work. And so Iris had a women's stag in her living room once a week, and I would go to that. And so when it was the day for my dad's funeral came, Iris came downstairs and said, "Don't worry about Sally, I'll take care of her. She's just another drunk like I am." And she put her arm around Sally, and she took care of Sally at that funeral. You know, it was time for me. I went to that funeral. It was time. I could not speak for my father. I just couldn't get up and say anything. So Dick did it for me. You know, he and I had been living I don't know if we'd been living together then or not, but he knew my father. You know, he knew what he was like. You know, he's very much like my father in many ways. That's probably why I love him so much. But he was able to do that. He was able to get up and speak for my father. And so there were other people in the program who knew him, because I had some parties when he was alive, and they came too. So you see, I had all the support and all the love that I could possibly have had in that first 5 years to get me through the kind of pain that I had to go through in those years. You know, and after that life started to get a little bit easier for me. You know, I was able to relax and start having a little bit of fun. You know, and it's been great fun. I mean, I have wonderful friends in this program. I mean, I got great friends. It was Gary and Lorraine are here. I asked them to come tonight. That's unheard of for me to ask people to come and hear me, because I was uneasy about getting up in front of this group and sharing. I needed to have some friends here, and you know, there's just so much love in this program. Pat came. Thank you so much for showing up. And I forgot your boyfriend's name because I'm so self-obsessed right now. But he works for Bob. Bob came to. That's what happens to me. But you know, I'm also sweating now, Jane, in case you wanted to know how I would be, what honesty does for me. But, you know, I hope that I've shared with you what happens, you know, in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd like to tell you that my disease of alcoholism is abated, that I've worked the steps many, many times, and I'm now spiritually evolved. That is not the case, okay? That is not the case. You would have known that if you had been in the car driving over here tonight with me. I'm not spiritually evolved, nor is this disease of alcoholism gone from me. It is not gone. I just want to share something briefly with you. I went probably on the trip of a lifetime the beginning of the summer. It was a trip of a lifetime for me because it's something that I've always wanted to do with my daughter, and I got the opportunity to do it. During those first 5 years of sobriety, my daughter was in Italy. She went there as a junior in college as part of a program, and then she graduated, and then she went back and lived there on and off for a year and a half. And many times during the course of her living in Italy, she asked me to come to visit. I could not go because my father was ill, and things were such that I couldn't get away. She's since returned here, and what happened this year is that she picked up the telephone in February and called me and said, "Hey, Mom, I want to run an idea by you. I'm going to go to Ireland this summer. How would you like to go to Italy first?" You know, and I said, "Great, let's do it." And I was working very hard at this job, and what I did is we planned this trip, and we left and we went to Italy, and we left on the 17th of June, and we were gone for a little over 3 weeks. We went to Italy, northern Italy, and we were in Paris during the World Cup, and it was probably one of the most marvelous trips I've ever had. It was so much fun. I'd never been to Europe, never seen that part of Europe, and being with her and having the opportunity to really share that kind of an experience was just incredible. Just incredible. And I came back feeling incredible. But you know what happened to me when I came back is that I went into a funk. You know, and I had no idea what was wrong with me. I was building up for this trip, and I came back and I got kind of blue. I don't know what happened to me, but I'll tell you what the disease of alcoholism did for me. It told me I needed to take a drink, or I needed some kind of pill to really take the edge off of the way that I was feeling, because I was really having a hard time. And I'll tell you, that kicked in with me, and it did not go away. It hung with me it hung with me and hung with me and hung with me for maybe a month and a half. It was really hard. You know, and I shared this with my sponsors. They told me, you know, what to do. They told me, you know, go to meetings and work with newcomers. You know, I wanted them to tell me to take the pill or to take a drink. You know, they didn't tell me to do that. They just said, you know, go to meetings and work with newcomers, and don't drink and don't use no matter what. And that's what I did. That's what I did. You know, so that today I stand before you sober by the grace of God and the principle of this program, sober by the action that you taught me to take, not by the decisions, by the action. Because as I was telling Jane, this is something that I learned early on. The third step says, made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God. That's like making a decision to pick up this cup. This cup will not move off this podium unless I take the action to reach out, lift it up, and move it. And so for me, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous begins with the fourth step. It goes from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, 11, and 12. And unless I take the action that I have learned in this program, I will drink and I will use again. Of that, I firmly believe. Thank you for letting me share.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.